back to Africa this morning. We are now on Table Talk, and today we are going to be discussing Africa. Just yesterday, the continent commemorated Africa Liberation Day. Are we maximizing that platform? Are we identifying opportunities to get Africa to a better position other than the dark continent it has been known to be? Joining us to discuss his perspective on Africa's next agenda is Levis Maina, who is the CEO of Sylvan Marketing and the chairperson of the Africa Brand Summit. You're taking on a big title there to brand the continent.
Yeah, quite something. Yeah.
History just branded Africa as the dark continent. What are you doing to change that perspective?
Well, first, Beryl, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's a great joy to be here.
Welcome.
Africa, for the longest time, has been known as, a dark continent. And when you follow what the Economist at some point published some time back, but over the decades or over the years, the perception has changed. And we are moving towards the Africa Rising. We are now talking about the future being in Africa. And when you think about the recent US-Africa summit that happened in 2014, it's a clear indication that the world is actually looking at Africa as the next frontier, So part of our work, what we intend to do, especially with the Africa Brand Summit, is to bring together, sector leaders from the private sector, public sector to join hands and use these branding principles to actually drive a sustainable development for the economy.
How are you merging the two perspectives? Because when it comes to private and public, they have two different approaches. They have different budgeting. They have different sensitization when it comes to pushing the envelope to get Africa on the platform of conversation.
Well, that's a very interesting one. You see, with the shifts that have happened, what we're looking at collaborative efforts and synergies where 1 + 1 is no longer 2, but it's 3. And what that means is that the private sector can contribute to the competencies and the professional aspect to it. And of course, the government can push for policies and a regulatory framework in which the two different parties can actually work together. So I feel there is a lot of collaborative efforts that is happening, and with the private-public partnerships, as well as other players coming on board, non-profits, media, and individuals as well.
How are you working with governments? Because I know when it comes to breaking barriers, getting Africa's brand on the new dispensation or in the new chapter, it can take a lot of work. Give us maybe a brief insight into what conversations you're having with governments and policymakers when it comes to changing their mindset to renew their approach on taking Africa seriously.
Wow, very good. First and foremost, especially when you look at Africa, I want to congratulate a couple of countries. South Africa has a government organ, which is Brand South Africa. Ghana has Brand Ghana, and Kenya, of course, has Brand Kenya Board. And this is some of the agencies that actually drive the branding agenda of a given nation, and of course, the different tourism boards within those countries. And so coming locally to our context, of course, we've had conversations with the Brand Kenya Board, with the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, KEPSA, and the Federation of Kenyan Employers, and a couple of other stakeholders in government. And then when you think about devolution, for example, we are having conversations with the different county governments and seeing how can they position their counties, because it's really competitive, and everyone wants to have the different investors and tourists actually visit their counties. And so it is important for us to engage the government in this conversation the same. So we're making strides. It's slow, it's gradual, but it is happening.
You've mentioned 3 countries, but we need to know whether you're facing challenges pushing the agenda of branding Africa. How are you managing to jump over the hurdles?
Well, it's quite a challenge because right from looking at the unit of Africa, we are looking at a nation. And branding a nation in itself is very challenging. Very challenging because it has multiple stakeholders. We have the policymakers, the politicians, who have their own personal interests. We do have the private sector. They do have their personal interests. We have investors, tourists, and the local people in the community. And so what happens is that most of this different people have the fact that they have different opinions, different interests, makes it burning very hard because there is no one unified message. and asking about these other countries, for example. Of course, it has to be an initiative by the different governments, but our prayer is that they will see the work that other countries like South Africa, for example, what they have done, and Kenya, for example. And recently, when there was the Boko Haram saga in Nigeria, and we know that the Nigerian government actually hired a PR firm to actually sort of help them manage their PR and the impact and the image of the country. So we are seeing that the role of branding or PR and image and reputation becoming very important for governments as well.
How are we avoiding to get ourselves caged in the traditional? For example, in Kenya, one of the issues that we faced is we're always known to be linked to the Maasai, to tourism. How are we decentralizing, diversifying our options, and even creating new ways for us to be seen in the international platform?
Well, very good. That's a very good one. I think Kenya, as a country, we are making progress. And one of the things that is putting us on the map is the innovation that we have. And a good example I will talk about Safaricom's M-Pesa. It has really placed us on the map. When you think about the Equity Bank, the model they're using in terms of banking is being studied at Harvard and other places. So we do have innovations that are important and are showcasing and putting us on the map. We do have our artist, Lupita Nyong'o. We are likely,
she's carrying that flag higher than anyone.
Absolutely, absolutely. But now, she's more, more American
than Kenyan
Kenya
or Mexican.
Absolutely. But I feel people like Lupita Nyong'o, we have our sports guys who are placing us on the map. But I think what we need more is to look at how can, say, our universities place us on the map. How can our entrepreneurs place us on the map, and all these things. The way, say, for example, Dangote, has placed Nigeria on the map. We can have the Chris Kirubis and other entrepreneurs that can actually place us on the map.
And how are we asking, or how are we even pushing for that agenda to be relooked at, even as you're talking about getting Kenya back on the map?
Very good. And that's why Africa Brand Summit, is pushing for that agenda. But all these different players can come on board. The media, media needs to showcase some of the success stories of the different countries that are there. We also have, other than the media, of course, government agencies, the tourism board and the branding boards and the investment boards to actually showcase this to the world. And it's a longer conversation because branding principles in the past haven't quite been embraced. And as I said, you see, we only have, say, 3 countries with established branding boards. What about the other 51 countries?
What's going to happen when it comes to moving the agenda of Africa forward? Maybe can we say that the other over 50 are holding on to identity because they feel that, one, when they push themselves a little bit too far, globalization seems to take over other than the African authentic identity?
You could say that, but I still feel the African Union, for example, plays an important role in bringing this to the agenda. And
are they?
Sorry, say that again.
Are they bringing it to the agenda?
We hope they bring it to the agenda. We are pushing for that.
We're already talking about it here.
Absolutely. We are pushing for that so that it's part of the agenda and the African Union, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And I will quote the Executive Secretary, Carlos Lopez. He said in one of the forums last year that Africa has a branding problem. So the United Nations actually acknowledges, and when you think about even the different investors, they want to come to the country, but there's a question of the perceptual risk. When you're saying, is it the other 50 countries, what are they doing about it, and is globalization catching up with them and whatnot? I think perhaps they have not quite embraced what branding can actually do to their countries. So I feel a strong value proposition needs to be pitched to these countries so that they see the importance of actually having a branding organ and collaborating with the tourism board to actually share the wonderful stories of Africa.
Touching still on globalization, many have felt that even when you're looking at globalization, it still positions Africa at the tail end of the conversation. For example, look at technology. We want to buy the latest phone, but the T9 is always positioned towards the English of the Queen, all hail the Queen, but we are never considered when it comes to emojis, we are never considered when it comes to the language. How are we getting ourselves back on the table so that Africa is not only branding itself for its people, but also for the world?
Very good. I like that. Pardon me, and that's why we go back to the issues of showcasing our innovation. And I think when you think about Kenya as a country, we have made very wonderful progress when it comes to technology. And other countries are borrowing our models of how we use the mobile phones and how we transact on the mobile phones and whatnot. And when you think about the international investors, what has happened is that we are seeing lots of investors coming to Africa because the growth rates of Africa are one of the highest in the world. And when you think about the developed countries, they haven't quite reached the growth levels in which Africa is actually
managing to get into.
Absolutely. And so I personally feel that having this conversations with the private sector and other stakeholders will actually drive the countries to see the importance of positioning ourselves for the global market.
Hopefully the Silicon Valley will not only be Silicon Valley for the United States, it will also involve getting Africa on board when it comes to the conversation.
Absolutely.
The next generation.
Absolutely.
We are always seeing them swinging very aggressively for the international front in entertainment, in culture, in dressing. How are we getting the youth involved to protect the identity that is Africa and even our authentic cultural richness?